candidate walked into the room with the kind of arrogance only the truly unaware could carry. Their steps were confident, almost swaggering, as if the entire world should be lucky to have them in the room. They flashed a quick smile at the interviewer, a gesture that seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. The interviewer, a seasoned leader with years of experience in hiring and managing teams, could immediately tell this was no ordinary candidate. "Please, take a seat," the interviewer said, gesturing to the chair across the desk. The candidate sat down without hesitation, looking around the room briefly, as if measuring the worth of everything in the space, from the framed certificates on the wall to the polished desk in front of them. "I'm here because I believe I'm the right fit for this company," the candidate said, their tone casual, almost dismissive. The senior leader raised an eyebrow. "We haven't even started the interview yet." The candidate waved a hand dismissively. "I know my worth. I don't need to explain it. I just want to know what the position offers and how fast I can move up." A flash of surprise crossed the interviewer's face, but they quickly masked it. It was rare, but not unheard of, for a candidate to walk in with this kind of self-assurance. Still, the arrogance in the air was undeniable. The interviewer leaned back in their chair, studying the candidate carefully. "Let's start with some basics, then. What made you interested in this position?" The candidate didn't miss a beat. "Well, the salary's decent, and I like the idea of having a team beneath me. But honestly, I've never worked in a place like this, so I'd probably be running things in no time." There it was. The attitude that screamed entitlement. The interviewer's eyes narrowed. This was going to be one of those interviews, the ones that pushed boundaries. But they decided to give it a chance, as they always did, not letting first impressions dictate the course of the conversation. The next question came naturally. "Tell me about your experience. What have you done so far?" The candidate leaned forward slightly, their expression shifting ever so slightly into something akin to smug satisfaction. "I don't have to explain my whole history. I've been successful because I know how to get things done. I don't waste time, and I don't work under people who don't recognize my potential." The senior leader took a deep breath. This was more than just overconfidence, it was a clear sense of superiority. The candidate wasn't interested in the process, the work, or the company. They were only interested in what they could take from it. As the interviewer listened, they couldn't help but feel a mix of disbelief and frustration. Could someone really believe they deserved everything without earning it? Without understanding the value of teamwork, struggle, or real leadership? They had to make a decision now, though, either shut this down or give the candidate a chance. But then something clicked. This wasn't just an interview. This was a moment of reckoning. The candidate was about to realize just how wrong their approach was, and the interviewer knew this could be a turning point in more ways than one. The question hanging in the air was simple: how long would this go on before the candidate's entitled attitude caught up with them? Little did the candidate know, the shocking moment was about to arrive. And it would change everything. The senior leader watched as the candidate settled back in their seat, clearly unaware of the tension mounting in the room. There was something unsettling about the way they spoke, like every word was wrapped in a layer of self-importance. The confident posture, the dismissive attitude, this wasn't just about being self-assured. It was arrogance. "Tell me, what challenges have you faced in your previous roles?" the interviewer asked, trying to steer the conversation towards something more substantive. It was a simple question, one they had asked countless times before, but this time, it felt like it might be more telling than ever. The candidate's eyes lit up. "Challenges," they repeated, as if the word was foreign to them. "I haven't really faced any. Things always go my way. My connections usually make sure that everything is sorted. I don't waste time on problems that don't need to be fixed." The interviewer's heart sank. There it was again. The candidate's world seemed to revolve around a bubble of privilege, one where everything was handed to them with minimal effort. The interviewer could see how this attitude had shaped their life and career, but there was no real substance to it. No deep understanding of what it meant to fight for something, to struggle, to grow from failure. And what about leadership? The interviewer pressed, trying to dig deeper. How do you lead a team through difficult situations? The candidate scoffed, clearly annoyed by the question. Leadership is easy when you know how to get people to follow you. It's all about making the right connections, right? The team will follow me because they know I'm the one with the vision. I don't need to prove myself like everyone else. The senior leader clenched their jaw, feeling the sting of the candidate's words. This wasn't just arrogance, it was a lack of respect for everything the company stood for. The idea that leadership came from connections rather than hard work, that vision could be bought rather than earned, made the leader question the candidate's entire worldview. It became increasingly clear to the interviewer that this wasn't just a bad attitude. This was a person who had never been challenged, who had never experienced what it was like to work for something, to struggle and push through the tough times. The candidate saw the world as something that owed them, not as something that had to be earned. But what disturbed the interviewer the most was the absence of any true understanding of what it meant to be part of a team. What about empathy? How do you connect with your team members on a human level? The candidate laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. Empathy? They shrugged. I don't need to be everyone's friend. They're here to work, and I'm here to lead. If they don't get that, then they'll just have to find somewhere else to go. The interview was no longer just a conversation. It had become a battleground of ideals, one where the senior leader could already sense the outcome. This was a person who would crumble under pressure, who would break down a team rather than build it up. But could they make the candidate see that? Could they snap them out of this entitled delusion? The tension in the room thickened. The senior leader had heard enough to know this wasn't the right fit. But there was a part of them, a professional part, that wanted to see just how far this would go. How long could the candidate keep up this mask of confidence before they were faced with the truth? And would the candidate ever realize just how damaging their attitude could be, not just to their career, but to their very sense of self? The interviewer's decision was no longer about whether or not to hire the candidate. It was about something much deeper, a challenge, a test of character. How far would the candidate go? How long could they keep pretending everything was fine? The room was about to become the setting for a powerful realization, one that neither the senior leader nor the candidate would ever forget. The senior leader sat back in their chair, carefully considering the candidate in front of them. A slight unease had begun to settle in their chest. It wasn't just about the attitude anymore, it was something deeper, something about the very foundation of this person's character. They had made it this far by relying on their connections, their wealth, their status, but what had they truly learned along the way? What did they understand about the people they hoped to lead? Let's talk about your achievements, the senior leader said, trying to steer the conversation into calmer waters. What are you most proud of in your career? The candidate's face lit up with a grin. Well, I've always had things handed to me, they began confidently. I come from a family with a lot of influence. My father knows everyone who matters, and he's always been there to pull strings whenever I needed something. The words hit the senior leader like a punch in the gut. This was it, the moment the candidate revealed the truth, the layer beneath the polished surface of their arrogance. It wasn't hard work that had gotten them here. It was privilege. It was connection. And they had never once considered the reality that others had to face. You've never had to struggle, the senior leader said quietly, more to themselves than to the candidate. The statement hung in the air like an accusation. The candidate looked confused, as though they hadn't even considered the idea. Struggle, they repeated, their tone almost dismissive. No, I've always been set up for success. Why would I struggle? My father ensures that everything goes smoothly. I just show up, and things happen. Simple. It was clear to the senior leader now that the candidate had no understanding of what it meant to work for success, to earn every inch of progress. They didn't see the sacrifices others made, the late nights, the constant push to overcome obstacles. All of those things were invisible to them, because they had never had to experience them. As the senior leader processed this, they couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for the candidate. What would they do when they were no longer protected by their family's wealth and influence? What would they do when the world didn't bend to their will, when they couldn't rely on the people around them to fix their mistakes? But there was something else there, something darker. The senior leader realized that the candidate's sense of entitlement wasn't just the result of their upbringing, it had become a part of who they were. They had internalized the idea that the world owed them something, and now they were in this room, expecting to be handed a job without understanding the work it required. "Tell me about your leadership style," the senior leader asked, trying to redirect the conversation once more. "How do you approach building and leading a team?" The candidate leaned forward, their face lighting up again, clearly eager to answer. "Leadership is all about power," they said, their voice gaining strength. "It's about making sure people know who's in charge. They don't need to like me, they just need to respect me. And they'll respect me because of who I am and what I bring to the table. That's all there is to it." The senior leader felt a wave of frustration wash over them. This candidate had no idea what true leadership was. They were fixated on the idea of power, not understanding that real leaders earned respect through empathy, hard work, and the ability to connect with others. This wasn't just a mismatch of qualifications, it was a fundamental misunderstanding of what it meant to lead. As the candidate continued speaking, the senior leader couldn't help but think about their own journey, the years spent building their career, the countless challenges faced and overcome. They had worked their way up from nothing, struggled through tough times, and learned the value of humility and perseverance. To hear this candidate speak so casually about leadership, so unaware of the responsibilities it entailed, felt like a slap in the face. But the senior leader knew one thing for sure now: this was no longer just an interview. It was a test of both the candidate's character and their own ability to navigate a conversation that had taken a deeply unsettling turn. The candidate, still unaware of the growing tension, continued to speak as if the interview was a formality, something that was beneath them. They still didn't see it. They didn't realize that this was the moment where their entitled attitude was going to meet the reality of the situation. The senior leader took a deep breath, mentally preparing for what was about to come next. There was still time to change the course of this interview, to help the candidate see the truth of their own ignorance. But would they listen? Would they even understand? The air in the room was thick with tension now. The senior leader could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. It wasn't just about the interview anymore, it had evolved into something much more significant. The senior leader had made a decision, albeit one they hadn't fully acknowledged yet. This candidate wasn't just underqualified for the job. They were unprepared for the real world. And this interview had to become more than just a formality. The senior leader leaned forward, locking eyes with the candidate. "You mentioned earlier that leadership is about power and making people respect you," they said, their voice calm but firm. "But let me ask you this, what's the most difficult challenge you've faced in your career, and how did you overcome it?" The question hung in the air, almost too simple in its directness. The senior leader had asked it many times before, and the answers had always varied, from the genuine to the overly rehearsed. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't just about the candidate's ability to think on their feet, it was a test of character. A test that the candidate would not pass easily. The candidate blinked, their cocky demeanor faltering for the first time. They leaned back in their chair, staring blankly at the wall for a moment, clearly struggling to come up with a response that would live up to the question. I haven't really had to face anything that hard," the candidate finally said, their voice laced with uncertainty. "I mean, I've always had a clear path ahead of me. My connections make things go smoothly. I've never been put in a situation where I've had to struggle. The senior leader's gaze hardened. This was it. This was the tipping point. Do you understand what you're saying? The senior leader asked, their voice lower now, as if measuring each word carefully. You've never had to face a real challenge because someone else has always cleared the path for you. Your success has been built on other people's efforts, not your own. And that's fine if you want to live in a bubble, but it's not the reality of the world out there. The candidates shifted uncomfortably in their seat. The shift was subtle, but the change in their posture didn't go unnoticed by the senior leader. They could see it now. The candidate was starting to realize just how much of their world was based on illusion. But would they admit it? Or would they continue to cling to the sense of entitlement that had served them so well up until now? I'm not sure what you mean, the candidate said, still sounding defensive. I've worked hard in my own way. I've made the connections, I've built my network, and that's how the world works. The senior leader shook their head. That's not leadership. That's manipulation. Leadership comes from understanding people, earning their trust, and showing them the way forward. It's about empathy, humility, and sacrifice. It's about working with others, not over them. The room seemed to fall into an uncomfortable silence. The candidate, still visibly uncomfortable, didn't respond immediately. Their earlier confidence was slipping, but they didn't yet understand the full extent of what had just been said. I've worked with countless leaders, the senior leader continued, their tone softening, and not one of them got to where they are by relying solely on their connections. They did the hard work. They earned their place. And the ones who didn't, well, they didn't last long. It's not enough to be handed everything in life. At some point, you have to take responsibility for your own actions, your own decisions. The candidate opened their mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. They were speechless. The arrogance had faltered. But it wasn't yet clear whether they were listening, or just processing what had been said. The senior leader leaned back in their chair, feeling the weight of the conversation. This was the moment where everything could change for the candidate, or where it could fall apart completely. How much longer could they hold on to their sense of entitlement before they faced the harsh reality of the world they were about to enter? The senior leader let out a quiet sigh. They had done their part. Now it was up to the candidate to decide whether they would recognize the truth in what had been said or continue to live in a world where nothing was ever truly earned. The silence in the room was suffocating, the weight of the senior leader's words still hanging in the air. The candidate, for the first time since walking into the interview, seemed unsure. The walls of their confidence were beginning to crack, and the cracks were widening with every passing second. But the senior leader wasn't finished yet. They had given the candidate a glimpse of the truth, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough for the candidate to merely feel uncomfortable, they needed to understand, deeply and completely, what they had missed. The senior leader leaned forward again, locking eyes with the candidate. You still don't get it, do you? They asked, their voice steady, though the edge was sharper now. You've had everything handed to you, and you've never had to work for anything. But that's not the world you're about to step into. So let me ask you one more question. The candidate swallowed hard, clearly nervous but still trying to maintain a facade of composure. What's that? Tell me, the senior leader continued, if you're in charge of a team, and one of your team members is struggling, what do you do? How do you handle it? The candidate blinked, taken aback by the question. For a moment, they were silent, staring at the senior leader as if unsure how to respond. The idea of someone under them, someone who didn't share their entitled view of the world, was foreign. But they had to come up with something, anything, that would make them sound capable. Well, the candidate said, finally speaking up, I'd probably just tell them to step up. They need to get their act together. I don't have time for people who can't keep up. The senior leader's eyes narrowed, their patience thinning. You'd leave them to figure it out alone? You'd just throw them aside? The words felt like a sting, sharper than anything the senior leader had said before. That's your leadership style? You think that's how people respond to leadership? The candidate opened their mouth, but no words came out. The reality was finally starting to hit them. It wasn't just about a lack of skills, it was about a complete misunderstanding of what leadership required. Leadership wasn't about power, it was about responsibility, empathy, and knowing how to lift people up when they struggled. It was about guiding others through tough times, not abandoning them. The senior leader wasn't finished. They needed to make the point crystal clear. "Let me tell you a story," they said, their voice suddenly softer but no less firm. "When I started in this business, I had no connections. No family pulling strings. I had to fight for every opportunity. And there were plenty of times when I failed. But those failures taught me something: how to lead, how to be there for people when they need support, how to help them grow. You can't just bulldoze through life expecting things to fall into place because you think you deserve them. The real world doesn't work like that." The candidate's face remained blank, their arrogance starting to slip, but they still couldn't bring themselves to fully grasp the message. They had been so accustomed to the world bending to their will that they couldn't fathom what it meant to truly earn respect, to build something from the ground up. The senior leader continued, watching the candidate carefully. "Do you see now? Leadership isn't just about being at the top. It's about what you do for the people around you, how you help them become better. How you inspire them to work together, not push them away because they don't meet some invisible standard." The words landed, and the senior leader could see it, the shift in the candidate's expression. There was a flicker of realization, but it was brief. The candidate looked down at their hands, lost in thought for a moment. Could they truly change? Could they reshape their perspective after living their entire life thinking they were entitled to everything? Or was it already too late? "Do you want to be a leader, or do you want to be a boss?" the senior leader asked, leaning in slightly, their voice steady but filled with weight. The candidate didn't answer immediately. Instead, they looked up slowly, as if trying to process everything that had been said. The interview had gone far beyond expectations, but had it done its job? Had it truly opened the candidate's eyes to the harsh reality of leadership? The senior leader knew they had made their point, but the question now was whether the candidate would choose to see it. Would they leave this room with a new understanding, or would they walk out, unchanged, still wrapped in the false sense of superiority that had defined them for so long? The candidate sat there, silent now, looking down at their hands as if trying to gather their thoughts. The air was thick with uncertainty, and for the first time in this entire interview, the senior leader wasn't sure how things would unfold. They had spoken truthfully, trying to show the candidate the reality of leadership, of hard work, of sacrifice. But the question remained, would the candidate truly understand? After a long pause, the candidate looked up, their expression conflicted, as if struggling with something they had never faced before. "I didn't think of it like that," they admitted, their voice quiet, lacking the usual arrogance. The shift was subtle, but it was there. For the first time, they seemed unsure of themselves. The senior leader leaned in slightly, not wanting to break the moment. "What's going through your mind?" they asked softly. The candidate hesitated, their eyes darting around the room, seemingly searching for the right words. I guess I've always just assumed that I would get what I want. That people would follow me because of who I am, not because of anything I've earned." They paused, then added, "I never really thought about what it means to be a leader. I just thought people had to respect me, because that's how I've always lived." The senior leader's heart softened. This wasn't a moment of victory, it was a moment of transformation. The arrogance that had defined the candidate was slowly crumbling, but the process was painful. It was hard to admit that your entire life had been built on a foundation of illusion, that your success had been handed to you instead of earned. The senior leader could see the weight of that realization beginning to settle on the candidate. "I understand," the senior leader said, nodding slowly. It's not easy to see the world differently, especially when you've been taught something your whole life. But it's not too late to change. Leadership doesn't happen overnight, and it's not about power. It's about earning trust, guiding others, and putting the team above yourself. The candidate nodded slowly, processing the words as if they were trying to make sense of them. There was still a lingering sense of disbelief in their eyes, but something else had started to take root, a genuine curiosity. For the first time, they seemed to be considering the idea of leadership in a new light. The senior leader sat back, allowing the candidate time to reflect. I'm not going to tell you that you'll be able to lead a team overnight. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to grow. But if you're truly willing to take responsibility for your actions, to put others first, and to recognize your role in helping people grow, then you might just find that you have the potential to be a real leader. The words seemed to hit the candidate harder than the senior leader had expected. For the first time, the candidate's confidence wasn't a shield. Instead, it seemed to be unraveling, layer by layer, revealing a person who was grappling with their own identity. A person who had built their entire life on the idea that success was owed to them, but now faced the harsh reality that nothing truly worth having came without effort. You think I can change? The candidate asked, their voice smaller than it had been throughout the interview. You think I can actually learn how to be a leader, after all this time? The senior leader smiled gently. Anyone can change, but only if they're willing to put in the work. Leadership is about humility, and the first step is recognizing that you don't know everything. If you can do that, if you can truly accept that there's more to learn, then yes, I think you can change. But it's up to you to decide. The candidate nodded slowly, but the doubt was still there. There was no magic moment where everything fell into place. It wasn't going to be easy, and they knew it. The road ahead would be filled with discomfort, but at least now they were beginning to see what true leadership looked like. And as the interview continued, the senior leader knew one thing for sure: this candidate had started to question their whole worldview. Whether they would rise to the challenge or continue down the path of entitlement remained to be seen, but for the first time, they had been given the chance to choose. The interview room was quiet, but the tension was palpable. The senior leader watched the candidate, their mind racing. The change in the candidate was subtle but undeniable. They were no longer the same confident, entitled person who had walked in just an hour ago. The arrogance had been chipped away, piece by piece, and now, the candidate was left with a sense of vulnerability they hadn't shown before. But vulnerability alone wasn't enough to make someone a leader. Leadership demanded more than just an emotional reckoning. It required action, consistency, and a willingness to change. Let me ask you something, the senior leader said, breaking the silence. You've said you're used to being at the top, having everything handed to you. But let me ask, how do you plan to lead a team if you don't fully understand them, if you don't truly know their struggles? The candidate seemed to ponder the question, their eyes narrowing as they thought it through. This wasn't a question about their resume, their skills, or their connections. It was a question about their soul, about what they valued. And that made the candidate pause. I guess I've never really thought about it like that, they admitted, their voice quieter now. I've always just assumed people should be grateful for the opportunity to work with me, not that I should understand what they're going through or help them when things get tough. The senior leader leaned forward, their voice firm but compassionate. And that's the difference between being a boss and being a leader. A boss demands respect because of their position. A leader earns respect because they understand, because they are willing to support others. They know what it's like to struggle, to fall short, and to pick themselves up again. Without that empathy, you won't build a team, you'll just have followers who wait for you to tell them what to do. And those followers won't stick around for long. The candidate looked down, clearly uncomfortable with the truth in the senior leader's words. For the first time in their life, they were forced to confront the fact that their success had never been earned. It had been handed to them by others. And that, more than anything, was the real test of leadership. Could they learn to be someone who earned the respect of others, rather than demanding it? The silence lingered for a moment, heavy with the weight of the conversation. The candidate looked up, their eyes meeting the senior leaders. "I want to change," they said, their voice quieter now, almost uncertain. "I don't want to be the person I've been all these years. I can see now how wrong I've been." The senior leader nodded slowly. "It's good that you can admit that. But change is never easy. It's going to take more than just a shift in mindset. It's going to take effort, real effort, and a willingness to face discomfort head-on. If you're truly ready for that, then you have a chance to grow into the leader you could be. But you need to be ready to work for it." The candidate's eyes were wide now, and there was something different about their expression, a glimmer of realization, a spark of understanding. They had spent their entire life expecting things to come easily. But now, for the first time, they understood that leadership wasn't about taking what was given to them. It was about giving, about working for the trust and respect of others. The senior leader sat back in their chair, watching the candidate. "You've reached the breaking point," they said softly. "The point where you either continue to live in the bubble of entitlement, or you break free and learn what it truly means to lead. The choice is yours." For the first time in this interview, the candidate didn't have an answer ready. Instead, they sat there, processing everything that had been said, the weight of the truth slowly sinking in. Could they really change? Could they walk away from this interview as a different person? The senior leader stood up, signaling the end of the interview. "You're not going to get this opportunity anywhere else. If you truly want to change, if you want to be the leader you say you can be, then you'll have to start with yourself. The rest will follow. But the question is, are you willing to take that first step?" The candidate stood up slowly, their face thoughtful, their posture less confident than when they had entered. "I don't know if I'm ready yet," they said, almost to themselves. "But I want to be. I really do." The senior leader smiled, a small but genuine smile. "That's all anyone can ask for, acknowledging where you are, and being willing to change." As the candidate left the room, they didn't have all the answers. They didn't even have a clear plan. But they were beginning to understand what it would take to truly lead, and that was the first step toward change. They had no idea yet how long the road would be, but one thing was clear: the journey had just begun. Days passed since the interview, but for the candidate, the words from that room lingered in their mind, echoing through their thoughts like a constant reminder. They had spent their whole life surrounded by wealth, connections, and an ever-present sense of entitlement. The idea that they could become a real leader, one who earned respect, who understood the struggles of others, seemed both foreign and daunting. But it was also a challenge they couldn't shake off. The senior leader's words had struck deep. They had shown the candidate a mirror, one that reflected not the polished, perfect image they had spent years constructing, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who they were. And the truth was, they didn't like what they saw. The candidate had not immediately returned to the company. In fact, for a while, they took a step back, retreating into their familiar world. But the unease was growing. They started questioning everything they had taken for granted, everything they thought they knew about success and leadership. It wasn't just about the interview anymore. It was about realizing how much they had been missing, how much they had misunderstood the world they wanted to conquer. They couldn't just continue on this path of taking from others, of expecting to be handed the title and the power. That was never real leadership. They decided to call the senior leader, the person who had opened their eyes in ways they hadn't anticipated. With hesitation, they dialed the number they had taken down after the interview, their nerves a mixture of fear and excitement. Would the senior leader even remember them? Would they see any potential for change, or would they simply dismiss the call? To the candidate's surprise, the senior leader answered almost immediately, their voice as calm as it had been during their last conversation. "Hello?" The senior leader's voice was warm, but there was an underlying edge, like they had already known this moment would come. I've been thinking, the candidate began, their voice uncertain at first, but gaining confidence with each word. About everything we talked about. About leadership. I realize now that I've been so far from what a leader really is. I've been wrong. There was a pause on the other end, and then the senior leader responded, their tone measured. It's not easy to admit that. But it's a crucial step. I want to learn, the candidate continued. I want to change, not just for myself but for the people I lead. I don't want to be the person I was before, and I'm ready to put in the work. I need help, guidance. I understand now that this isn't something I can just expect to be handed to me. The senior leader smiled, even though they knew the candidate couldn't see it. You've taken the first step. And that's the hardest one. But now you need to be consistent. It's not about one moment of realization, it's about every single day, making the choice to be better, to understand more, to put others before yourself. The candidate's heart raced, a strange mix of relief and determination filling them. They had made the call, but this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The path ahead was still unclear, but they now knew it wasn't going to be easy. They would have to work hard to shed the habits that had built their entitled persona, to learn to listen, to lead with empathy, and to take responsibility for their actions. The senior leader's voice broke through their thoughts. If you're serious about this, you'll have to prove it, not just to me, but to everyone you work with. Words are easy. Action is where the real work begins. The candidate took a deep breath. I understand. And I'm ready. The candidates spent the next few weeks in deep reflection. They began reaching out to their team, the people they had so easily overlooked in the past. They started to listen more than they spoke, asking questions about their challenges, their needs, and their ideas. For the first time, they understood the value of collaboration, of supporting others, and of truly earning the trust of those around them. The results weren't immediate, but they were noticeable. The team responded to the candidate in ways they had never done before. There was an underlying respect that began to build, but it wasn't automatic. It was earned, through consistency, humility, and hard work. But even with this shift, the candidate faced challenges. There were moments of doubt, moments when the weight of their past mistakes threatened to pull them back into old habits. But they remembered the senior leader's words, it's about every single day. The candidates stayed committed. They continued to make the tough choices, to put others first, and to grow in their leadership journey. Months passed, and the changes in the candidate were nothing short of remarkable. The journey had not been without its struggles, but it was clear now that the person who had walked into that interview room, entitled, arrogant, and blind to the realities of leadership, was no longer the same person. The work wasn't easy, but it was rewarding. The transformation was gradual, but it was real. The candidate had taken every lesson to heart. They started with small acts of humility, listening to their team, acknowledging their mistakes, and making real efforts to understand the challenges faced by others. Slowly but surely, the respect from their team grew. Not because they demanded it, but because they had earned it. One afternoon, the senior leader visited the company office, and the candidate, now a completely different person, was waiting for them. The senior leader had come to see for themselves how the candidate had been doing, how far they had come since that first interview. When the senior leader walked into the office, they were greeted by a much more grounded version of the candidate. Gone was the arrogant posture, replaced by someone who was calm, collected, and genuinely interested in those around them. I've been hearing a lot of good things, the senior leader said with a knowing smile. About your progress. About the way you've been working with your team. The candidate stood a little taller, but this time, it wasn't from pride. It was from the quiet strength that came from within. I still have a lot to learn, they admitted, but I'm doing my best to lead by example, to listen, and to grow. Every day. The senior leader nodded, pleased with what they were hearing. Leadership is a long journey, but what you've done so far is impressive. You've earned the respect of your team, not because of your title, but because of who you've become. The candidate smiled softly. I've realized that leadership isn't just about getting what you want. It's about helping others get where they need to be, and understanding that it's not about being at the top, it's about bringing people with you. The senior leader's smile deepened. That's the truth of leadership. It's not about power. It's about service, understanding, and creating an environment where everyone can thrive. As they stood together, the senior leader couldn't help but feel proud. Proud of the growth they had witnessed in this candidate, but also proud of the fact that they had been part of that journey. They had seen the candidate at their worst, entitled, blind to the struggles of others, and now, they saw someone who was beginning to understand what it truly meant to be a leader.